Marcus Wong stood at the edge of California's National Park, anticipation buzzing through him. In his hands was a VR headset, the culmination of years of work at his tech company. This wasn't just any device. It was a hyper-realistic simulation allowing users to interact with wildlife without real danger. Today marked the final test. Slipping on the headset, Marcus entered a lifelike, immersive environment. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and twigs crackled underfoot. The seamless experience felt real, a perfect blend of nature and technology. He marveled at the precision of the virtual world. Every fern, every ripple in the distant river was crafted with stunning accuracy. As Marcus took a few steps forward, the simulation adapted instantly to his movements. In this world, he was free to interact with nature in a controlled environment. He could explore wildlife habitats, observe creatures up close, and even trigger scripted scenarios for the user to face challenges without ever facing real consequences. This morning, the park was nearly empty, save for a few distant hikers. Marcus wanted this isolation, choosing to run the test away from distractions. His goal was clear: to merge technology and nature in a way that could educate, entertain, and thrill people from the safety of their homes. It was supposed to revolutionize virtual nature experiences. The system initiated its wildlife sequence. A large black bear, one of the animals programmed into the simulation, appeared ahead of Marcus. The bear moved realistically through the underbrush, pausing to sniff the air. Marcus's heart raced, not with fear, but with exhilaration at how convincingly the technology had replicated the encounter. He had seen real bears in the wild before, but this felt close enough to be breathtaking. The bear ambled toward him. From his programming, he knew that the bear would stop within a safe range, acting curious, but not aggressive. This was an essential part of the design, to simulate wildlife encounters without any real risk. Marcus stood still, observing the massive creature approach. But what Marcus didn't realize was that, in his complete immersion, he had begun to walk off the path deeper into the natural forest. The line between his surroundings and the virtual world began to blur as the system experienced a glitch. His footsteps were now taking him into an area he had no awareness of, into the territory of a real black bear, one that had been quietly moving through the forest. The few park visitors who remained at a distance watched Marcus, perplexed by his odd behavior, as he moved closer and closer to danger. Still engulfed in the virtual world, Marcus adjusted his stance, waiting for the simulated bear to move into position. He watched as the virtual bear tilted its head, its nostrils flaring, and took a few more steps forward. At this moment, the glitch in the system deepened, altering the bear's programmed response. The virtual bear, now acting unpredictably, suddenly appeared more aggressive, moving faster toward him. A thrill of adrenaline coursed through Marcus. He was unafraid. This was all just code. Yet he was so focused on the simulated bear that he didn't notice the subtle shift in his environment. The natural forest, filled with the earthy scent of pine and damp soil, remained unnoticed as his senses remained locked into the experience. In the real world, the actual black bear had caught his scent. Protective of its territory, it lumbered toward Marcus, unaware that the man in its path was in no condition to recognize the threat. To the bear, Marcus was an intruder, someone who needed to be warned away. Slowly, the animal advanced. Marcus, still locked in the virtual realm, mistook the glitch-induced behavior of the virtual bear for part of the test. He braced himself, watching as it simulated aggression. The bear in the simulation rose on its hind legs, roaring. The sound felt incredibly real, vibrating through his headset. He grinned at the authenticity of the experience, but in reality, the real bear mirrored that movement. It too stood up, roaring as it moved closer, now just yards away from Marcus. The few onlookers gasped in horror, watching as Marcus, still fully immersed in VR, faced down the massive animal without a single sign of fear. To them, it looked like some reckless stunt. Marcus's total lack of awareness appeared as either madness or extreme bravery. The real bear dropped down and began its charge. Marcus, reacting to the virtual bear's aggressive stance, took a step back, unaware that his actions were now being mirrored in a life-or-death situation. The real bear's powerful legs propelled it forward. It closed the distance faster than Marcus could have anticipated, still oblivious to the shift in reality. It wasn't until the real bear's breath hit his skin, hot, intense, and terrifyingly real, that Marcus felt something was wrong. His brain, struggling to reconcile the conflicting inputs, was too slow to comprehend. In a heartbeat, the bear was on him. The simulated world shattered as Marcus's headset was knocked askew by the bear's powerful paw. The blur of movement, the disorienting impact, the pain, it all came crashing down on him. His body hit the ground hard, and the wind knocked out his lungs. The VR headset dangled uselessly from his neck, torn away by the force of the blow. The real bear was enormous, far larger than any digital creation Marcus had designed, and it was enraged. As Marcus scrambled to his feet, panic gripped him. The bear reared again, slamming him down with another swipe. The ground beneath him felt real, cold, and unforgiving as he struggled to escape. The force of the bear's attack left Marcus dazed. His vision blurred as pain radiated through his body. He tried to push himself up, but the bear wasn't finished. It bit down on his shoulder, the weight of its massive jaws crushing muscle and bone. His scream echoed through the forest. Nearby park visitors could only watch in helpless horror, too far away to intervene in time. The bear, satisfied with its dominance, eventually relented, leaving Marcus broken and bloodied on the ground. As the forest fell silent again, Marcus lay there, barely conscious, the VR headset now a useless relic of his hubris. For all his technological innovation, Marcus had lost sight of the one thing he couldn't control: nature's raw, unforgiving reality. Samuel Owens moved silently through the forest, his every step an echo of the generations of hunters that came before him. This land, sacred to his ancestors, had been theirs for centuries, a place of spiritual connection and survival. Now declared a protected area by the government, it was guarded by rangers who enforced strict regulations, forbidding Samuel and his people from hunting the land they once called their own. His defiance today was a quiet act of preservation, of culture, of tradition. For Samuel, hunting wasn't just about taking life. It was about balance and honoring both the land and the animals. His rifle wasn't just a weapon, but a symbol of his people's past and their bond with nature. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the familiar sounds of the forest surrounded him. Birds called out from the canopy above, and the underbrush rustled faintly with life. After hours of careful tracking, he spotted movement in a small clearing. A grizzly bear, a mother, her cubs by her side. Samuel's heart raced. He had no intention of disturbing the bear, knowing well the danger of provoking her. Slowly he began to retreat, moving with deliberate caution. But as he backed away, a distant crack pierced the quiet, a branch breaking, followed by voices. Park rangers. Their presence shattered the peace, and the mother bear's demeanor shifted. Her protective instincts kicked in. Samuel froze, realizing too late that he was now caught between the rangers and the angry bear. He could hear them now, their voices echoing faintly through the trees. They were far off but getting closer, no doubt alerted by his presence in the restricted area. Samuel cursed silently to himself, knowing that the rangers were not only violating the peace of the forest, but putting him and the animals in danger. The bear, still unaware of Samuel, lifted its head, sniffing the air with cautious curiosity. Samuel knew he had to move quickly before the rangers drew nearer. But as the voices grew louder, the mother bear's demeanor shifted. The once serene creature became agitated, its ears twitching, its head swiveling toward the source of the noise. The cubs huddled closer to her, sensing the change in their mother. The rangers were too noisy, oblivious to the fragile balance of the wild they claimed to protect. With every step they took, the tension in the air thickened. Samuel's heart pounded. He was caught between two forces, one man-made and the other nature itself. He glanced back at the bear, her agitation quickly turning to aggression. Samuel had seen enough wildlife to know what was coming next. The mother bear's muscles rippled beneath her thick fur as she began to move toward the perceived threat, the rangers. But they were too far, and Samuel was much closer. His presence, combined with the approaching rangers, had created the perfect storm. Without warning, the bear charged. Samuel's instincts kicked in, his body moving on its own as he scrambled to get out of the bear's path. He dropped to the forest floor, rolling to the side as the massive grizzly barreled past him with terrifying speed. His rifle, slung over his shoulder, knocked against the ground, but there was no time to reach for it. The bear's sheer power was overwhelming, her growls echoing through the trees as she veered toward him, eyes blazing with primal fury. Samuel scrambled to his feet, sprinting toward the cover of the trees. Behind him, the bear's heavy paws pounded the earth, closing the distance faster than he could run. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he couldn't stop. The world blurred around him as adrenaline surged through his veins. He had dealt with dangerous animals before, but never like this. The bear was not just protecting her cubs from a threat, she was in a frenzy, fueled by the confusion and chaos caused by the rangers. Samuel zigzagged through the trees, trying to make himself a more challenging target, but the bear was relentless, her powerful body crashing through underbrush and branches like they were nothing. Just when Samuel thought he might be able to put some distance between them, the bear lunged again, her claws raking the air inches from his back. He stumbled, falling hard onto the forest floor. Pain shot through his body as his shoulder slammed into a rock, but he pushed himself up, knowing that to stop now meant certain death. The bear circled him, her growls vibrating through the ground. Samuel glanced around frantically, looking for any escape. His rifle lay several feet away, but the bear was too close for him to retrieve it. He grabbed a thick branch, using it to shield himself as the bear reared up on her hind legs, towering over him. With a ferocious swipe, the bear knocked the branch from his hands, sending it flying into the bushes. Samuel staggered back, his mind racing for a plan. The bear charged again, but this time Samuel threw himself to the side at the last second, causing the grizzly to miss him by a hair's breadth. The move bought him precious seconds, enough to scramble toward the rifle. The mother bear, confused by the sudden change in her prey's direction, hesitated for a split second, giving Samuel the opening he needed. He grabbed the rifle, rolling onto his back just as the bear charged one final time. But before she could reach him, a series of loud, sharp noises echoed through the forest. Gunshots from the rangers. The bear halted, her head whipping toward the direction of the sound. Samuel lay on the ground, chest heaving, as the bear, confused and disoriented, turned and fled back into the woods, her cubs following close behind. Samuel lay there for a moment longer, the weight of the encounter sinking in. Caught between human laws and nature's wrath, he had survived by mere inches. He could hear the rangers approaching, but their presence felt distant, almost irrelevant. For now, all that mattered was the second chance he was given. The Appalachian Mountains stretched endlessly with their dense, rugged forests. As dawn broke, Jack moved silently through the underbrush, his boots barely making a sound on the damp earth. The sun's early rays cast long shadows, and the forest stirred with the soft rustling of waking wildlife. Having hunted these woods for over 2 decades, Jack knew the terrain intimately. His goal today was a mature buck he'd been tracking for days based on fresh tracks he'd seen by the creek. Every step Jack took was precise and measured, reflecting his deep familiarity with the wilderness. The forest, thick with towering oaks and maples, created a canopy of green and gold, filtering sunlight into a dotted pattern. Jack's rifle was slung over his shoulder, and his camouflage attire blended seamlessly with the surroundings. His breath was steady, his heartbeat slow. He was entirely in his element. As Jack followed the fresher tracks more profoundly into the woods, he noticed broken twigs, stray hairs, and faint hoof impressions. His pulse quickened with excitement. The forest grew denser, the scent of earth and decaying leaves filled the air, and the distant sound of running water reached him. Then he spotted new tracks, larger, deeper, and indicative of a bear. Jack crouched to inspect them, noting their fresh appearance and wandering pattern. Black bears roamed these woods, though encounters were rare. His attention shifted from the deer to the bear as a sudden rustle in the bushes made him freeze. Jack readied his rifle and moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. Through a break in the trees, he spotted the bear about 30 yards away, its massive form partially obscured by bushes. The bear was foraging, its snout buried in the undergrowth. Jack marveled at the sight, but remained alert. Just as he decided to retreat, his foot slipped on a loose stone, creating a sharp noise. The bear's head snapped up, its eyes locking onto Jack. A tense standoff ensued, with Jack hoping the bear would lose interest. However, the bear's nostrils flared, detecting Jack's scent. Its body tensed, muscles rippling. And Jack knew the situation had changed. Bears are unpredictable. Their behavior is governed by instinct and circumstance. Jack understood this all too well, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The bear, perhaps perceiving Jack as a threat to its food, let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the trees. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the bear took a step toward him, its posture suddenly aggressive. He knew he had to act fast. Without thinking, Jack began to slowly back away, his rifle now raised slightly, ready to fire if necessary. He didn't want to shoot the bear. It wasn't necessary. If he could create enough distance, the bear might decide he wasn't worth the trouble. But the bear had other ideas. It took another step forward, then another, its growl deepening into a roar that sent birds scattering from the treetops. And then, in an instant, the bear charged. The speed of the attack was startling. One moment, the bear was several yards away. The next, it was thundering toward him, a blur of black fur and fury. Jack barely had time to react. He aimed his rifle, but the bear was too fast. It was on him before he could pull the trigger. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. The force of the bear's charge knocked Jack off his feet, sending him crashing to the ground with a bone-jarring thud. His rifle was torn from his hands, skidding across the dirt out of reach. The bear was on top of him, its powerful claws digging into his flesh, its teeth snapping inches from his face. The world became a blur of pain and chaos as Jack fought to free himself from the bear's relentless assault. Jack's survival instincts kicked in. He twisted and turned, using every ounce of strength he had to fend off the bear's attacks. But the bear was an unstoppable force, its claws ripping through his jacket, tearing into the skin beneath. Jack's vision blurred with the pain, but he forced himself to focus, to think. He knew that if he didn't find a way to escape, the bear would kill him. Somehow, in the chaos, Jack managed to roll onto his side, his hands scrabbling in the dirt for something, anything, that he could use to defend himself. His fingers brushed against a rock, smooth and cool under his touch. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, swinging it with all his might at the bear's head. The rock connected with a sickening thud, and for a split second the bear recoiled, stunned. It was the opening Jack needed. Ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder, he scrambled to his feet, lunging for his rifle, which lay a few feet away. But the bear recovered quickly. It roared in anger, its eyes wild with fury, and charged again. Jack could feel its hot breath on the back of his neck as he reached for his weapon, his fingers closing around the stock just as the bear's claws raked down his back. He fell to the ground, the rifle in his hands, and rolled onto his back, bringing the weapon up just as the bear lunged at him. There was no time to aim, no time to think. Jack squeezed the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the forest, a loud crack that seemed to hang in the air. The bear flinched, a look of shock in its eyes as the bullet grazed its shoulder. It wasn't a fatal shot, but it was enough to make the bear hesitate, enough to break the momentum of its attack. For a moment, the bear and Jack stared at each other, both panting heavily, both bloodied and exhausted. Then, slowly, the bear began to retreat. It backed away, its eyes never leaving Jack, as if weighing whether to continue the attack. But finally, with a snort of frustration, it turned and lumbered off into the woods, disappearing into the underbrush as quickly as it had appeared. Jack lay on the ground, his chest heaving with each ragged breath. Pain radiated from every part of his body, but he was alive. He had survived. He knew he had to move to get out of the forest and find help before his injuries overwhelmed him. But for a few moments he just lay there, staring up at the canopy of trees above, his mind reeling from the ordeal. Vast, the cold dawn light filtered through the tall pines of Banff National Park, casting long shadows over the dense underbrush. The crisp air carried the fresh scent of pine needles and the lingering chill of the night. Levi and Arnold, part of a small group of campers, had risen early, eager for a day of hiking in the Canadian Rockies. After arriving at their campsite the previous evening and enjoying a night of laughter around the fire, they had retired to their tents, lulled by the wilderness sounds. The campsite, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks, offered stunning views and easy access to popular trails. It was a serene spot that promised adventure and a break from daily life. As the sun rose, the campsite was peaceful, with only the rustling of leaves and occasional bird calls breaking the silence. The campers, still groggy, prepared breakfast and discussed their plans for the day. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon mingled with the earthy scent of the forest, creating a tranquil morning. However, amid this calm, a mistake had been made. In their excitement, the group had neglected food storage guidelines. A half-eaten sandwich and snacks were left on a picnic table. They had planned to address it in the morning, but they did not fully grasp the potential consequences of their oversight. The scent of the food drifted through the forest, attracting a grizzly bear, a powerful predator roaming Banff National Park. This grizzly, with a thick brown coat and rippling muscles, was drawn by the promise of an easy meal. Experienced in scavenging human campsites, it was quick to seize opportunities. In the early morning hours, while the campers were still asleep, the grizzly approached the campsite. Moving silently through the forest, the bear's heightened senses guided it toward the source of the enticing aroma. As it emerged from the trees and approached the campsite, its eyes fixed on the unattended food, a primal response ignited. The bear's pace quickened as it crossed the open ground, its breath visible in the cool air. The campers, focused on their morning routines, remained unaware of the approaching danger. It wasn't until one of them stepped out of his tent and spotted the bear that fear jolted through the group. Levi, who the fire pit had crouched, looked up just in time to see the grizzly bear emerge fully into the clearing. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he was frozen in place, his mind struggling to process the sight before him. The bear was immense, its size even more imposing up close, and its presence was utterly terrifying. The animal's eyes gleamed with a mix of curiosity and hunger as it sniffed the air, its gaze locking onto the unattended food on the table. Panic began to ripple through the group as the campers realized the gravity of the situation. Arnold, who had been gathering firewood a short distance away, dropped his bundle and rushed back toward the others. He too felt the cold grip of fear as he saw the bear advancing on their campsite. The grizzly, sensing the rising tension, paused for a moment, its ears twitching as it gauged the human's reactions. Levi and Arnold exchanged a glance, their unspoken understanding clear. They needed to scare the bear away. It was a desperate plan, born of the instinct to protect their friends and themselves, but it was also one fraught with danger. They knew the risks of confronting a grizzly, especially one that had already identified a food source. Yet the alternative, doing nothing and allowing the bear to rummage through their campsite, seemed just as dangerous. Levi, summoning all the courage he could muster, grabbed a large branch from the ground. He knew that bears could be intimidated by loud noises and aggressive posturing, but he also knew that it was far from a guaranteed deterrent. Arnold, following Levi's lead, picked up a metal pot and began banging it loudly, hoping to startle the bear into retreat. The grizzly, however, was not easily intimidated. It had encountered humans before and was familiar with their attempts to scare it off. Instead of retreating, the bear let out a deep, resonant growl, a sound that reverberated through the campsite like a thunderclap. The campers froze, their makeshift weapons suddenly feeling woefully inadequate in the face of such raw power. Without warning, the bear charged. The grizzly closed the gap with terrifying speed. Levi, standing closest, barely had time to react before the bear was on him. He swung a branch in a desperate defense, but the bear effortlessly batted it away. The force sent Levi crashing to the ground, pain searing through his chest as the bear's claws raked across him. His vision darkened as the bear loomed overhead. Arnold, seeing Levi's peril, rushed to help, wielding a metal pot. But the bear, fully committed, turned on Arnold with lightning speed. It bit down on his arm, the pain excruciating and fiery. The bear shook Arnold violently, dragging him to the ground. Despite Arnold's desperate kicks and strikes, the bear's immense strength overpowered him. Levi, though badly injured, pushed himself to his knees, his vision blurred. He grabbed a rock and hurled it at the bear. The rock struck the grizzly's face, causing it to release Arnold momentarily. The brief distraction gave Arnold a chance to scramble away, clutching his wounded arm to his chest. Blood oozed from the deep gashes where the bear's teeth had sunk into his flesh, and he could feel the strength draining from his body with each passing second. But the instinct to survive was strong, and he forced himself to keep moving, knowing that to stop would mean certain death. The campers initially panicked, but they regrouped and tried to drive the bear away with noise. They grabbed sticks, rocks, and metal objects, creating a desperate symphony of survival. The grizzly hesitated, disoriented by the commotion. After a bone-chilling roar, it turned and lumbered back into the forest. In the aftermath, Levi lay on the ground, bloodied and gasping, while Arnold, barely conscious, was cradled with a makeshift tourniquet. Shock and horror were evident on the campers' faces. Despite their severe injuries, Levi and Arnold were still alive. The group quickly contacted park rangers and emergency services, who responded swiftly. Within an hour, a helicopter arrived, airlifting Levi and Arnold to the nearest hospital. Tom Sweeney, an avid fisherman, cherished the solitude of Alaska's rivers, where the natural world provided a perfect escape from modern chaos. In late August, during the peak of the salmon run, he had found a secluded spot along a remote riverbank. The river was alive with salmon fighting upstream, and Tom, in his well-worn waders, was immersed in the tranquil rhythm of fishing. The scent of pine and the soft blue sky made for a serene setting. Tom had risen early to secure this prime location. Each cast of his fly rod was precise, and soon he had hooked his first fish of the day. Hours passed in peaceful solitude as the sun rose higher and his creel filled with glistening salmon. Unbeknownst to Tom, a large grizzly bear had been silently observing him. Drawn by the scent of the fish, the powerful apex predator moved stealthily through the forest. Its deep brown fur and muscular frame were almost invisible against the underbrush, and the unfamiliar scent of a human piqued its curiosity. The bear kept its distance at first, evaluating the situation. It was accustomed to catching salmon, but was intrigued by the easy meal that the human seemed to be enjoying. With each step, the bear moved closer to the riverbank, its eyes fixed on Tom with predatory intent. Tom remained oblivious to the danger. Focused on landing a huge salmon, he didn't notice the bear's approach. The river's roar masked the bear's movement, and the grizzly was now just yards away, preparing to strike. Tom's attention was entirely on the fish, unaware of the massive shadow looming behind him. The attack was sudden and violent. The bear charged with astonishing speed, its massive body hurtling through the brush and onto the riverbank. The ground shook beneath its weight as it thundered forward, closing the distance in mere seconds. Tom barely had time to register the blur of motion before the bear was upon him, knocking him off his feet with a force that sent him crashing into the icy waters of the river. Disoriented and shocked, Tom struggled to regain his footing as the cold water closed around him. The world spun in a chaotic swirl of noise and pain, the river rushing in his ears as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. His fishing rod slipped from his grasp, the line trailing uselessly in the current as he flailed, trying to find some purchase on the slick riverbed. But the bear was relentless, its massive paws swiping at him with deadly precision. Tom's survival instincts kicked in. He knew that to survive a grizzly bear attack, one had to fight back to make oneself appear as large and threatening as possible. But in the water, disoriented and panicked, such logic was hard to grasp. He reached for his knife, fumbling with numb fingers as the bear's claws raked across his back, tearing through the thick fabric of his jacket. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot fire that seared through his nerves and sent shockwaves of terror coursing through his body. Finally, he managed to free the knife from its sheath, gripping it tightly as he tried to turn and face his attacker. The bear loomed over him, its maw open wide to reveal rows of sharp teeth, its breath hot and rank against his face. Tom slashed at the bear with all the strength he could muster, the blade finding its mark in the thick fur, but the bear was unfazed, its primal rage overriding any sense of pain or injury. With a powerful swipe of its paw, the bear knocked the knife from Tom's hand, sending it spinning into the river. Tom was defenseless now, reduced to little more than helpless prey in the face of the bear's fury. He struggled to escape, kicking and thrashing in the water, but the bear was too strong, too determined. It reared back on its hind legs before coming down with crushing force, its jaws closing around Tom's neck in a death grip. The world around Tom seemed to slow to a crawl, the sounds of the river fading into a distant hum. His vision darkened, the edges of his consciousness slipping away as the bear's teeth sank deeper into his flesh. There was no escaping the inevitable now, no hope of rescue or salvation. The bear's primal strength overwhelmed him completely, its massive body pinning him to the riverbed as it delivered the fatal bite. Tom's body went limp. The fight drained from him as life ebbed away. The bear, satisfied with its kill, dragged his lifeless form from the river and into the forest. The once peaceful riverbank was now a scene of violence and death, the water stained with Tom's blood as it rushed downstream. The bear, driven by its hunger, tore into Tom's flesh, feeding on the body with a savage intensity that only the wilderness could foster. Hours passed, and the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the river. The bear, having satisfied its hunger, left the remains of Tom's body deep within the forest, hidden from sight. The wilderness reclaimed the scene, the sounds of the river and the wind through the trees returning to their natural rhythm. But the violence of the attack lingered, a stark reminder of the brutal reality that lurked beneath the surface of Alaska's pristine beauty. When Tom Sweeney failed to return as expected, his family grew alarmed. Known for his punctuality and routine, Tom's disappearance was out of character. As hours passed and night fell, anxiety turned into fear. By morning, they reported him missing, triggering a search and rescue operation in the remote wilderness where he had last been seen. Search teams scoured the dense forest and rugged terrain, with helicopters overhead and search dogs on the ground. Despite their efforts, days passed with no sign of Tom, dimming hopes of finding him alive. The breakthrough came at the riverbank, where they discovered bloodstains, torn clothing, and grizzly bear tracks. Following the trail into the forest, they found Tom's remains. The evidence of the bear's brutal attack was clear, leaving behind a scene of devastation. The news of Tom's death shocked his family and community. A cherished figure, Tom's loss was profound and served as a stark reminder of the dangers of Alaska's wild landscape, where the beauty of nature is coupled with its inherent risks. August 2023, the Thomas family embarked on a much-anticipated hiking adventure in Montana's picturesque Bear Creek Den Park. Jack, a 12-year-old boy with an adventurous spirit, led the way with his family's golden retriever Max, bounding happily alongside him. His parents, Lisa and Robert, followed closely, basking in the joy of the family's time together in nature. The trail, though popular, was tranquil at this time of day. The rustling leaves and occasional chirp of birds were the only sounds that accompanied their hike. The family paused at a clearing, admiring the view of a distant mountain range, their hearts light and minds at ease. Max, excited by the sights and smells of the wilderness, darted into the brush, his barking echoing through the trees. Unbeknownst to the Thomas family, their joyous hike had unknowingly led them toward a potentially dangerous situation. Hidden in the dense undergrowth was a mother grizzly bear and her two cubs. The vigilant and protective bear had chosen this secluded area to nurture her young away from the prying eyes of humans. The cubs, playful and curious, were nestled in the thick brush, their safety depending on their mother's constant vigilance. As Max's enthusiastic barks pierced the quiet, the cubs, startled by the unexpected noise, scurried and whined in alarm. The sound of the dog's barking reached the ears of the mother bear, who instantly went on high alert. Her instincts, honed by years of survival, detected a potential threat. With a low growl, she rose from her resting spot, her massive frame tense and ready. The mother grizzly's heart raced as she prepared to defend her offspring. Jack, oblivious to the danger, continued to explore the trail, his enthusiasm undiminished by the peaceful surroundings. The vibrant colors of the wildflowers and the cool shade of the trees made the hike seem like a page from a storybook. He wandered farther from the trail, drawn by a cluster of particularly striking blooms. Suddenly, the situation escalated. The mother grizzly, feeling the urgency of the threat to her cubs, emerged from the brush with startling speed. Her powerful legs propelled her forward, her eyes locked onto the source of disturbance. The sudden appearance of the massive bear sent shockwaves through the family. Max, still barking, had run back towards Jack, his fur bristling with alarm. In a moment of sheer terror, the bear charged. Jack, frozen in shock, turned to see the terrifying figure barreling toward him. The grizzly's roar was deafening, a primal sound that cut through the serene afternoon like a knife. The sheer force of the bear's charge knocked Jack off his feet, sending him sprawling onto the forest floor. Lisa and Robert, their hearts racing and adrenaline surging, sprang into action. They grabbed their bear spray, an essential item they had packed just in case, and rushed toward their son. The bear, focused on the perceived threat to her cubs, was relentless. Her massive paws swatted and clawed at Jack, who lay helpless, his body racked with pain. Lisa, her hands trembling, aimed the bear spray with all the strength she could muster. The toxic spray erupted in a fine mist, enveloping the bear in a cloud of deterrent. The bear recoiled, her powerful frame momentarily stunned by the intense spray. Her eyes, filled with a glare, darted between the now wounded Jack and the desperate parents. Robert, not missing a beat, continued to spray the bear while Lisa crawled toward Jack, her hands shaking as she assessed his injuries. The boy's face was pale, and blood seeped from multiple gashes and wounds. The bear, disoriented and agitated by the spray, hesitated for a split second before retreating into the brush with a final menacing growl. Her cubs, sensing the danger had passed, emerged cautiously and followed their mother, disappearing into the depths of the forest. The Thomas family, now faced with a heart-wrenching reality, scrambled to provide aid to Jack. Lisa applied first aid as best as she could, her mind racing with fear and urgency. Robert called for emergency assistance, his voice strained with panic. The forest, once a place of beauty, now seemed like a hostile environment, with every rustle of the leaves and snap of a twig amplifying their distress. The minutes dragged on as they awaited help. The air was thick with tension and dread. When the sound of distant helicopters finally reached them, it felt like a lifeline. Rescuers arrived swiftly, their expertise and calm demeanor providing a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. They carefully lifted Jack onto a stretcher, the boy's unconscious form a stark reminder of the brutality of nature. The helicopter's blades whirred as it ascended, carrying Jack to a nearby hospital. Lisa and Robert, their hearts heavy with anguish, followed in the ambulance, their minds replaying every moment of the horrifying encounter. Jack's injuries were severe, and while he would survive, the road to recovery was uncertain and fraught with challenges. In the weeks and months that followed, the Thomas family grappled with the psychological and emotional aftermath of their harrowing experience. The trail they once loved now symbolized a near-tragic encounter, a reminder of nature's unpredictable and sometimes brutal realities. They had ventured into the wilderness, seeking adventure and beauty, but were met with the stark, terrifying force of a mother grizzly defending her young. In 2024, the Montana mornings were crisp and still, with a light frost clinging to the ground as the sun began to rise over the mountainous horizon. John Peters, a rancher in his mid-50s, had long established a routine that provided him peace amidst the rugged wilderness surrounding his property. Every morning, just as dawn cracked the sky with streaks of pink and gold, he and his loyal dog, Scout, would set out for a walk along the forested trail behind the ranch. It was their time, away from the bustle of ranch work, the cacophony of life. John's property sprawled across a vast stretch of Montana's untamed land. The towering pines, the endless stretches of grassland, and the occasional rippling of the creeks painted a picture of serenity. It was a place where the ruggedness of nature and the familiarity of home met. John loved this land. Scout, his trusty Australian shepherd, loved it even more. Unbeknownst to John, a large grizzly bear had been foraging not far from the trail, rummaging through the underbrush for roots and early-season berries. The bear, a female, had recently awakened from hibernation and was ravenous, its powerful muscles stiff from the long months of sleep. Her foraging spot, just 100 yards from where John and Scout walked, was dense with trees, casting deep shadows that shielded her presence. As they approached, the wind shifted, carrying the human scent toward the bear. Scout was the first to sense something was wrong. His nose twitched, ears perked up, and he stopped dead in his tracks. John noticed the sudden change in his dog's demeanor, and his senses were now on high alert. Scout's growl was low at first, a warning, but within seconds it erupted into furious barking. The forest, which moments ago felt peaceful, now seemed alive with an impending threat. The barking echoed through the trees, growing more frantic as Scout charged ahead, breaking through the undergrowth toward the source of his distress. John hurried after him, his heartbeat quickening. Scout was fiercely protective, and the sudden aggression worried John. He called for Scout to come back, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of barks. By the time John caught sight of his dog, he realized what was happening too late. Through the trees, he saw her, a massive grizzly bear, nearly 7 feet tall when standing, her brown fur blending into the shadows of the forest. The bear had been startled by Scout's approach, turning toward the noise with a growl of her own. As Scout charged toward her, barking wildly, the bear reared onto her hind legs, towering above the dog. In a split second, the situation escalated. Scout, brave but outmatched, lunged at the bear, but she swatted him aside with a single decisive strike. The force of the blow sent Scout tumbling through the dirt, yelping in pain. He landed several feet away, his body limp, the air filled with the heart-wrenching sound of his last whimper. John froze for a moment, shock flooding his body as he watched his beloved companion fall. His chest tightened with panic, the rawness of the situation hitting him. Without thinking, John ran toward Scout, desperation overriding the primal fear that surged through him. But the bear, now thoroughly agitated, had shifted her focus to him. As John reached for Scout, the bear charged, covering the distance between them in seconds. Her speed was terrifying. What had once been a hulking presence lumbering in the trees now moved with the ferocity and precision of a predator. John barely had time to react as she barreled into him, knocking him off his feet. The impact felt like being hit by a freight train. John's body hit the ground hard, his breath leaving him in a painful gasp as the weight of the bear crushed down on his chest. Her claws, long and sharp, raked across his arms as he instinctively tried to protect his face. Pain shot through him like wildfire, a deep, searing burn as the claws tore through skin and muscle. His vision blurred as he struggled, his mind racing with survival instincts, but knowing deep down the odds were stacked against him. The bear's jaws snapped close to his head, her growl vibrating through the air, filling the forest with a menacing sound. John flailed, trying to push her away, but it was like trying to move a mountain. His bloodied and trembling hands found a fallen branch, and he swung it desperately at the bear's head. The bear barely flinched, more annoyed than deterred by the feeble attempt to fight back. John's movements were slowing now, the adrenaline beginning to wane as his body succumbed to the overwhelming force of the attack. His arms, covered in deep gashes, were growing weak, and the bear, sensing the fight leaving her prey, backed off slightly. She stood over him, her breath heavy and snorted, eyes wild and filled with the primal energy of a creature that had just asserted dominance over its territory. John lay on the ground, his body broken, his breath shallow. The pain was all-encompassing, radiating from every part of him. He could feel the blood pooling under him, soaking into the earth as the cold of the morning began to seep into his bones. He turned his head slightly, his vision narrowing, and saw Scout lying still a few feet away. The sight of his fallen companion was a dagger to his heart, a final blow to his spirit. For what felt like an eternity, the bear stood over John, sniffing the air, assessing whether the threat had passed. Then, as quickly as she had attacked, she turned and lumbered off into the trees, disappearing into the shadows from where she had come. The forest once again grew silent. John lay there, motionless, the enormity of the tragedy weighing down on him. The attack had left him severely injured, his body a testament to the raw power of the wild. He tried to move, to call for help, but his voice was nothing more than a hoarse whisper, lost in the vastness of the wilderness. Beside him, Scout, his loyal companion, his protector, was gone, leaving behind only silence and the stark reminder of the unpredictable dangers lurking in bear country. Roberts had always been a careful hiker. He had explored many trails in America over the years, always ensuring he was prepared for the unpredictable wilderness. But in July 2024, during a solo hike that had started as an early morning adventure, Jason made a wrong turn that would forever change his life. The day began innocently enough. The sun was already warming the skies, casting a golden hue across the rugged landscape. The park was teeming with life, the vibrant greens of the trees and the steady flow of rivers offering a tranquil backdrop. Jason's goal was to follow a familiar path to catch a view from a high ridge, but somewhere along the way, distracted by his surroundings, he veered off course. By the time he realized his mistake, he was deep into uncharted territory. The terrain grew more challenging as he ventured further. Large patches of dense shrubs and tall grass blocked his view, and the trail beneath his feet had become nothing more than a faint indentation. His heartbeat quickened as a creeping realization set in. He was in an unfamiliar land, possibly far from any established trail. Instinct told him to retrace his steps. It was a rule all seasoned hikers knew: never continue forward when lost. However, something about the stillness in the air made Jason uneasy. There was an unnatural quiet, the usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves absent. He felt watched, though the vastness of the wilderness around him seemed empty. As he turned to head back, that sense of unease escalated. The undergrowth behind him stirred, and the snap of a branch sent a jolt of fear up his spine. Jason froze, eyes scanning the bushes. The park's grizzly bears were infamous, but he hadn't seen one in all his years visiting Yellowstone. Still, he was in prime grizzly territory, and the heavy rustling could only mean one thing. Something massive was moving through the brush. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging. He reached instinctively for his bear spray, but before he could read it, the bear emerged. It was enormous, at least 700 pounds of raw muscle and ferocity. The grizzly's fur was matted and dark, and its eyes locked onto Jason with an intensity that sent shockwaves of fear through him. The animal's breathing was heavy, its nostrils flaring as it assessed the unfamiliar human now standing on its hunting grounds. Jason's mind raced. He knew the proper protocol: stand your ground, don't run, and make yourself seem larger. But when facing down a massive grizzly bear, theory was far easier than practice. The bear's ears flattened, and in an instant it charged. The ground seemed to tremble beneath Jason's feet as the beast surged forward, muscles rippling with terrifying speed. There was no time for thought, no room for strategy. The bear closed the distance in seconds, its movements a blur of power and predatory precision. Jason fumbled with his bear spray, but panic clouded his actions. The bear struck him with its total weight, knocking him to the ground as if he were no more than a twig. The impact left Jason dazed, the breath forced from his lungs. Before he could process the pain, the grizzly's massive claws raked across his chest, tearing through fabric and skin with horrifying ease. He felt the burn of the wounds immediately, blood soaking into his clothes. His instincts kicked in, and he raised an arm to shield his face, but the bear's savage onslaught continued. It swatted at him again, claws slashing across his arm, leaving deep, jagged gashes. Pinned beneath the bear's weight, Jason was helpless. The beast's hot breath washed over him, its growls vibrating through his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to fight back, but his body was limp, overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the attack. The bear's jaws closed around his shoulder, teeth puncturing muscle, and it shook him violently as if to remind him who ruled this territory. The pain was unbearable. Every nerve in his body was alight with agony. Desperate, Jason's fingers finally closed around the bear spray canister that had been flung to the side during the initial attack. With what little strength he had left, he aimed blindly toward the bear's face and released the spray. A cloud of sharp, stinging chemicals burst forth, enveloping the bear's head. The bear recoiled instantly, letting out a furious roar as the spray irritated its eyes and nose. Jason took the chance to roll onto his stomach, trying to distance himself from the enraged animal. For a brief moment, the bear stood over him, its massive paws stamping the ground, shaking its head violently as the spray took full effect. It looked as though it might charge again, but something in the bear's primal instincts urged it to retreat. With one last snarl, the grizzly turned and lumbered back into the forest, vanishing into the undergrowth as quickly as it had appeared. Jason lay motionless on the ground, his body screaming in pain, every breath a struggle. His vision blurred from the blood loss and shock, but he knew he couldn't stay there. Survival instincts took over. He had to move to find help, but his body refused to cooperate. Every inch of him felt torn, his wounds oozing, and his limbs unresponsive. Despite the severity of his injuries, he began to crawl. It was agonizing. Each movement sent waves of pain coursing through him, his shredded skin and broken body barely able to function. He was only vaguely aware of his surroundings, the forest spinning around him in a haze of blood and terror. Time became meaningless as he dragged himself forward, driven only by the will to survive. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. It was impossible to tell. Jason was on the brink of consciousness when a distant sound reached his ears. It was the unmistakable hum of voices, a group of hikers approaching. He could barely raise his head, but he mustered the last of his strength to make a weak noise, a plea for help. The hikers found him not long after, sprawled in the dirt, his body covered in blood and deep claw marks. They acted quickly, contacting park authorities and doing their best to stabilize him until help arrived. Jason was airlifted to a nearby hospital in critical condition, his survival a testament to his sheer determination and the bear spray that had given him a second chance at life. In the weeks that followed, Jason reflected on that fateful day. The physical scars were severe, but the psychological trauma cut deeper. He had always respected the wild, but now he understood its merciless nature in a way he never had before. Fire began with a lightning strike, igniting the dry forest in an instant. Within hours, flames tore through the pines, carried by fierce winds that turned the sky into a fiery orange haze. Park Ranger Tom Hawkins had seen wildfires before, but none like this. The blaze was rapidly approaching the small Montana town, every minute bringing it closer. Tom spent the day coordinating evacuations, ensuring families escaped before the flames cut off their routes. By afternoon, the fire had grown uncontrollable, consuming everything in its path. The air was suffocating, thick with smoke, and breathing became harder with each moment. As Tom navigated a narrow gravel road, his radio crackled, reports of a missing family from a remote cabin. The fire was faster than anticipated, and the road was nearly obscured by smoke. Determined to save them, Tom pressed on, the deafening roar of the fire closing in behind him. He reached the cabin just as the fire began creeping toward the surrounding trees. Thick smoke clouded his vision, and the acrid smell of burning pine filled his nostrils. He could see the family, a couple and their 2 children, huddled together outside, their faces pale with fear. Waving for them to follow, he ushered them toward his truck, adrenaline surging through him as the inferno closed in. The sky above them turned a deep, unsettling orange, and ash began falling like snowflakes. Just as the family climbed into the truck, Tom heard a deep guttural growl from behind him. Instinctively, he turned toward the sound. Emerging from the smoky haze was a black bear, its massive body tense and trembling, eyes wide with fear. It had likely been driven from the deeper forest by the encroaching flames, its survival instincts overriding its usual wariness of humans. The bear's eyes locked on Tom, confused and disoriented, caught between the advancing fire and the strange scent of human presence. It snarled, its breath heavy and labored as it swayed on its feet, panting from the heat. Tom's heart raced as he found himself trapped between the panicked bear and the encroaching fire. He knew black bears typically avoided humans, but this one was frantic, its senses overwhelmed. The bear lunged forward suddenly, muscles rippling as it closed the distance between them. Tom backed away slowly, trying to maintain calm despite the pulse of fear throbbing in his chest. He knew the fire would soon trap them both if he didn't act fast. The bear reared up, its sharp claws extending as it let out a low, threatening roar. Tom's mind raced for a solution. Behind him, the family sat in the truck, their terrified faces visible through the windshield. They were waiting for him to join them, to drive them to safety. But he couldn't turn his back on the bear, not with the flames pressing in on all sides. The heat was overwhelming now, and Tom could feel the sweat pouring down his face, stinging his eyes. The fire crackled louder, creeping closer to the bear, which only made the animal more agitated. With no other option, Tom grabbed a fallen tree branch from the ground and swung it in the air, trying to divert the bear's attention. But the bear was too panicked, too overwhelmed by the heat and the smoke to back down. Suddenly, the bear charged at him, its speed catching Tom off guard. The bear's massive paw swiped across his chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. Pain seared through his body as the claws tore through his shirt and skin, leaving deep gashes. Tom gasped for breath, the wind knocked out of him as he tried to scramble to his feet. The bear loomed over him, its hot breath steaming in the air as it prepared to strike again. Tom's survival instincts kicked in, adrenaline surging through him despite the agony radiating from his chest. He grabbed the branch again, using it to push the bear back with whatever strength he could muster. The bear growled in frustration, but Tom's resistance bought him a few precious seconds to get back on his feet. His legs trembled beneath him, weakened by the shock and blood loss. But he knew he couldn't afford to collapse. The fire was now dangerously close, its heat searing the edges of his clothes and the thick smoke making it almost impossible to breathe. Every breath felt like inhaling molten ash, burning his lungs and throat. Behind him, the truck engine sputtered to life, the family's hope for escape hinging on whether Tom could hold off the bear just long enough for them to flee. The bear made another lunge, but this time Tom sidestepped just in time, his movements sluggish but precise. He swung the branch again, this time striking the bear on the snout. It roared in pain and backed off momentarily, confused by the unexpected blow. Tom took this chance to stagger toward the truck, his vision blurring from the blood loss and the relentless smoke swirling around him. As he reached the driver's side door, his body sagged against the vehicle, his strength nearly gone. The bear, disoriented by the flames and the unfamiliar situation, hesitated just long enough for Tom to pull himself into the truck. He slammed the door shut as the bear swiped at the window, its claws leaving deep gouges in the glass. Tom fumbled with the gear shift, his hands shaking violently as the fire raged around them. The truck lurched forward, tires skidding on the gravel as Tom steered it away from the advancing flames. The bear, confused and injured, finally retreated into the thickening smoke, disappearing into the inferno behind them. Tom's vision swam, darkness creeping in at the edges as the pain in his chest became unbearable. Tom fought to keep the truck moving through the smoke, pain throbbing from deep gashes on his chest. The fire roared behind him, but the road ahead was clear for now. His breath came in shallow gasps, fighting unconsciousness as the truck sped forward. After some minutes, the flames receded in the mirror, but Tom's vision darkened. He later woke up in the hospital, unsure how he got there, but his survival now seemed certain. Wind howled relentlessly as snow swirled around the remote research station, a desolate outpost on the edge of the world. Dr. Elena Sokolov stood at the window, staring out into the bleak expanse of ice and snow. The once frozen landscape that had seemed so permanent was now shifting, cracking, and receding under the grip of global warming. The melting sea ice had pushed wildlife inland, most notably polar bears. The team of biologists, led by Elena, had come to study the effects of climate change on Arctic ecosystems, but now they were seeing its consequences firsthand. The research station was no longer a haven. It had become a beacon for the starving predators, whose natural hunting grounds were vanishing at an alarming rate. The bears, drawn by the scent of food and the warmth of the human presence, circled the station day and night, testing its defenses with increasing boldness. Elena and her team had barricaded themselves inside, but the thin walls of the station felt like paper in the face of these immense creatures. Supplies were running low and the bears showed no signs of leaving. Outside, the massive white forms blended into the landscape, but their dark, intelligent eyes were always watching. Elena's mind raced as she considered the situation. Every time a bear approached, it brought with it a palpable sense of dread. These animals were not merely curious, they were desperate, driven by hunger. The thin veil of the natural world's balance had been torn, and now the apex predator was on their doorstep, starving, relentless, and willing to do whatever it took to survive. The first few nights had been manageable. The bears would approach cautiously, sniffing the air and retreating after a few minutes of indecision. But now, the bears had grown bold. One night, Elena had heard the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the station's metal siding. The bears were no longer testing the boundaries, they were attacking them. Her team was small but capable. 3 other researchers, all seasoned biologists, were used to the harsh conditions of the Arctic. Still, none of them had anticipated this level of danger. Polar bears were usually solitary hunters, but the shrinking ice had forced them into proximity. Elena suspected that hunger had brought them together, turning them into a coordinated, dangerous force. They had been trapped for a week now, with their satellite communications equipment malfunctioning, and each day grew more perilous as supplies dwindled. The frigid temperatures did little to keep the bears at bay, and the researchers began to feel the claustrophobia of their situation, stuck in a cramped, isolated station with no sign of rescue. On the 8th day, it happened. The team had been debating whether to venture outside to retrieve some of the remaining food rations stored in a shed not far from the main building. They knew the risk was enormous, but hunger was setting in, and they had no other options. Dr. Marcus Hewitt, a young and eager biologist, volunteered. He reasoned that he could dash to the shed and back before the bears noticed, if they were lucky. Elena's gut twisted with anxiety, but the logic was sound. They could not survive without the supplies, and there was no telling how long they could hold out for a rescue. With no other choice, Marcus donned his heavy Arctic gear, shouldered a rifle for protection, and prepared to head out. The rest of the team watched from the window, tension thick in the air. As Marcus stepped out into the white wasteland, the biting cold immediately swept over him. He moved quickly but cautiously, keeping his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The shed was only 100 meters away, but it felt like miles. The snow crunched under his boots, the only sound in the eerie stillness of the Arctic landscape. Elena's heart raced as she watched him approach the shed. The polar bear figures were nowhere to be seen, but she knew they were close. Marcus reached the shed's door and pulled it open, disappearing inside for what felt like an eternity. When he finally emerged, His arms loaded with supplies, relief swept over the team. But that relief was short-lived. From the corner of her eye, Elena spotted movement, a blur of white against white. A bear had appeared, materializing from the snow as if conjured by the landscape itself. It moved with terrifying speed, its massive paws silently cutting through the snow as it closed the distance between itself and Marcus. The bear's black eyes were locked on him, its enormous jaws slightly open as it charged. Marcus hadn't seen it yet. He was focused on making his way back to the station, the supplies weighing him down, slowing his movements. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to warn him, but the futility of that instinct stopped her. There was nothing they could do from inside the station. The bear struck with the ferocity of a freight train, knocking Marcus to the ground before he even had a chance to react. The supplies scattered across the snow as the bear's massive paw came down on his chest, pinning him to the frozen earth. Marcus thrashed beneath the bear, his arms flailing, but it was no use. The bear lowered its head, jaws snapping at his limbs. Elena and the others watched in horror, helpless, as the attack unfolded just meters away. The bear was unrelenting, its powerful jaws clamping down on Marcus's arm with a sickening crunch. Blood splattered across the snow, bright red against the white canvas. Marcus kicked and struggled, trying to free himself, but the bear was too strong, too determined. His cries of pain were lost in the wind as the bear tore into him with savage efficiency. His rifle, useless now, lay buried in the snow just out of reach. Elena felt a cold sweat break out across her skin as the reality of the situation settled in. They couldn't save him. They couldn't even leave the safety of the station without risking the same fate. The attack lasted only moments, but it felt like an eternity. When the bear finally stood up, blood dripping from its mouth, Marcus lay motionless in the snow, a broken, mangled figure. The bear lingered for a moment as if to confirm its kill, before lumbering off into the distance. Inside the station, the air was thick with shock and grief. No one moved. No one spoke. The bears had claimed their first victim, and Elena knew it would not be the last. Their situation had grown even more dire. Supplies were now scattered and inaccessible, and the bears were becoming more aggressive with each passing day. Elena's mind raced as she considered their next move. The bears were not just a threat. They were a force of nature, a manifestation of the environmental collapse they had come to study. Trapped between the unrelenting predators and the unforgiving Arctic, Elena realized that survival would not come quickly, if at all. Chen arrived at the bear sanctuary, nestled in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, with enthusiasm and a desire to make a difference. The dense forests, teeming with wildlife, offered a sense of isolation from the world she left behind in the bustling city. This sanctuary was a refuge for brown bears, animals often rescued from horrible conditions such as circuses or illegal captivity. The bears, once abused and broken, were given a second chance at life here. For Jade, it was more than just volunteering. It was a calling. Jade was passionate about wildlife conservation, and her dedication to the cause led her to this remote part of the world. Despite her inexperience, she quickly immersed herself in the daily routine of feeding, cleaning, and observing the bears under the guidance of the sanctuary staff. Among the bears, one had caught her attention from the start, a young rescued brown bear named Misha. Misha had been found chained and undernourished, a victim of illegal bear baiting. His scars ran deep, both physically and emotionally, but Jade saw something in him. Despite his troubled past, Misha had a gentle side, often approaching Jade with curiosity. Over the weeks, she formed a bond with him, something that filled her with a deep sense of accomplishment. She believed in the possibility of healing, in bridging the gap between human and animal, where compassion and patience could overcome even the most brutal of pasts. Misha grew stronger under the sanctuary's care, and Jade's confidence in their bond grew alongside him. He would follow her along the enclosure's fence line during her shifts, always eager to catch her eye. In return, she often stayed longer than necessary at his enclosure, watching him with a sense of connection she hadn't experienced before. The sanctuary had strict rules, though, regarding interactions with the bears. They were wild animals, after all, despite the trauma they had endured. The staff constantly reminded Jade and the other volunteers that no matter how gentle the bears seemed, their instincts could not be ignored. Jade nodded along during the lectures, But in her heart, she felt Misha was different. They had an understanding, she told herself. He trusted her. One brisk autumn morning, Jade was tasked with assisting the veterinary staff with routine health checks. It wasn't her first time in the small examination area, but today was different. Misha was one of the bears scheduled for the check. As Jade watched the team prepare the equipment, she couldn't help but feel a slight nervousness creep in. Bears, especially young ones like Misha, could quickly become agitated during these procedures. Still, Jade remained calm, confident that her presence would comfort him. When it was Misha's turn, he was coaxed into the enclosure with the veterinary team, Jade standing close by, observing. At first, everything went smoothly. Misha seemed calm as the team began their inspection. Jade's heart swelled with pride, convinced that her bond with him had eased his nerves. But as the vet started the more invasive parts of the checkup, Misha shifted uneasily. His growls deepened a low rumble that echoed off the walls of the enclosure. Jade watched as the bear's muscles tensed, and for the first time a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Misha was no longer the curious young bear who followed her along the fence. He was growing uncomfortable, his wild instincts beginning to surface. The team noticed this as well and started to wrap things up, but Misha wasn't having it. He shook his head violently, knocking over some of the equipment. The team stepped back, giving him space, but Jade, feeling that she could calm him, made her move. Ignoring the warnings that raced through her mind, Jade approached Misha slowly. She believed in their connection. She thought that if he saw her or heard her, he would remember the trust they shared. As she moved closer, she could see his eyes wide with agitation, but she continued, her hand outstretched, her voice soft, hoping her presence would soothe him. It was a critical mistake. Misha, panicked and confused by the sudden change in environment and the vet's probing hands, saw Jade's approach not as reassurance but as a threat. In an instant, his demeanor shifted. His powerful and sharp claws lashed out with terrifying speed, catching Jade off guard. The impact was immediate and brutal. Misha's paw struck Jade across her chest, and the force knocked her to the ground. Pain exploded through her body as she felt the searing cuts tear through her skin. The world blurred around her as she struggled to comprehend what had just happened. The bond she thought she had, the connection she believed in so fiercely, had crumbled in a single swipe. Misha, still agitated, loomed over her, his growls now a furious roar. The vet team shouted, trying to distract the bear, but Jade couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but her body was frozen, the pain too overwhelming. Misha raised his paw again, his massive claws glinting in the harsh light of the enclosure. Jade braced for the next blow, knowing that this was a fight she couldn't win. In those seconds, everything she had believed in shattered. Misha wasn't a friend. He wasn't a creature she could trust, no matter how much compassion she had for him. He was a wild animal, driven by instincts far older and stronger than any bond they could have formed. And now, those instincts saw her as a threat. The second strike hit her leg, tearing through muscle and bone. Jade gasped in agony, the reality of her situation sinking in. She had misjudged the situation so wholly, blinded by her idealism and desire to connect. She had wanted to save Misha, but now she was the one who needed saving. The sanctuary staff acted quickly, using tranquilizers and distractions to pull Misha away from Jade. The bear, confused and angry, retreated as the drugs took effect, his massive form collapsing slowly. As Misha slumped to the ground, Jade lay still, her body battered and broken. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, barely conscious, her vision fading in and out. As the pain coursed through her, so did the realization that she had underestimated the power and unpredictability of the wild. Jade had come to Romania to help the bears, to rehabilitate them, and to give them a second chance. But in her naive hope, she had forgotten that wild animals, no matter how gentle they seemed, would always be wild. Sent on July 8, 2024, the Komarov family ventured into the heart of the Siberian wilderness. The day was warm, and the forest teemed with the hum of insects and the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. For Igor Komarov and his family, this trip was an escape from their hectic lives, a chance to reconnect with nature. Igor, a sturdy man in his late 40s with rugged strength, had long dreamed of showing his children the untouched beauty of Russia's wilds. His wife Alina, a quiet but resilient schoolteacher, shared his enthusiasm. Their children, 12-year-old Victor and 10-year-old Anya, were brimming with curiosity and excitement for the adventure. The journey to their campsite had been long and arduous, involving treks through dense forest and across winding rivers. They finally arrived at a secluded clearing surrounded by towering pines, offering a breathtaking view of distant mountains. There were no signs of civilization, just the Komarovs and the vast Siberian wilderness. As they set up camp, the children gathered firewood and explored their surroundings under their parents' watchful eyes. The crisp, fresh air was filled with the scent of pine needles and the earthy aroma of the forest floor. Igor, skilled in outdoor survival, built a fire pit, while Alina unpacked provisions, spreading bread, cheese, and cured meats on a blanket. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing, the family settled down for dinner. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the cool evening air. The aroma of cooking meat mingled with the forest's scents, carried away on the breeze. Unbeknownst to the Komarovs, a massive grizzly bear in the distance had picked up the scent of their meal. This creature, perfectly adapted to its harsh environment, was driven by a relentless hunger. It moved silently through the underbrush, its dark fur blending with the forest floor. The bear's acute senses allowed it to detect the faint sounds of laughter and see the flickering firelight between the trees. With each step, it drew closer. The Komarovs, oblivious to the danger, continued their meal as the light faded and the forest grew quieter. The usual sounds of wildlife diminished as nocturnal creatures began to stir. The fire's glow created a small island of warmth and comfort in the encroaching darkness. The bear was now so close it could smell the sweat on their skin and the faint hint of fear. It paused at the edge of the clearing, its eyes gleaming in the firelight as it observed the family with a predatory intelligence. Then, with a burst of speed that belied its size, the bear charged forward, crashing through the underbrush. The attack was sudden and ferocious. The bear lunged into the clearing, a force of nature that shattered the calm. The Komarovs had mere seconds to react. Igor, nearest the fire, was the first to recognize the danger. His heart raced as he turned, realizing the gravity of the situation. In that critical moment, his thoughts were consumed with protecting his family. As the bear closed in, chaos erupted. The once serene evening was now a tumult of primal fear and desperate action. The family scrambled to react, their evening of relaxation turning into a fight for survival against a relentless predator. Instinctively, Igor grabbed a burning log from the fire, brandishing it like a weapon. The bear, undeterred, met his defiance with a roar that shook the very trees. It swiped at him with a paw the size of a dinner plate. Claws extended, the blow connected with Igor's chest, sending him sprawling backward with air driven from his lungs. Pain exploded through his body, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had to fight. Alina screamed a sound that echoed in the vast emptiness around them as she tried to shield the children. But the bear was relentless, its hunger and fury driving it to tear into anything that moved. Igor struggled to his feet, ignoring the blood that soaked his shirt, and swung the burning log at the bear's face. The flames licked at its fur, singeing the tips, but the bear barely flinched. Instead, it reared up on its hind legs, towering over Igor, and brought both of its massive paws down with a force that could shatter bone. Igor collapsed under the blow, the log falling from his hands as he crumpled to the ground. The bear turned its attention to Alina and the children, who were frozen in place, their eyes wide with terror. For a brief moment, the clearing was filled with a terrible silence, the kind that precedes an inescapable doom. Then the bear attacked again, its primal instincts taking over as it closed in on the remaining members of the Komarov family. Alina tried to shield her children, using her body as a barrier between them and the beast. But the bear was unstoppable, its jaws snapping at anything within reach. It struck Alina with a force that sent her tumbling to the ground, her body limp as she hit the earth. Victor and Anya, too young to comprehend the full horror of what was happening, could do nothing but watch as the bear's rage was unleashed upon them. The animal's immense power was overwhelming, and in mere minutes the lives of the Komarov family were extinguished in a flurry of violence and blood. The bear, hunger-sated, dragged the bodies into the forest, leaving the once serene campsite a scene of unimaginable carnage. The fire continued to burn, casting flickering shadows on the trees as if the forest itself mourned the loss of the lives it had claimed. When local hunters arrived the next day, they were met with a profound silence. The clearing, once alive with the sounds of a family and nature, was now a grim tableau of death. The brutal remains of the Komarovs were scattered, torn apart by the bear's ferocity, and the ground was stained with blood. The hunters, seasoned in the wild's harsh realities, followed the bloodied trail more into the forest, their faces etched with grim determination. Knowing the bear, having tasted human flesh, would now be more dangerous, they proceeded cautiously. They eventually found the bear resting in a thicket, its bloodied fur marking its recent violence. The immense beast, with eyes reflecting primal intelligence, was a formidable threat. With heavy hearts, the hunters ended the bear's life, eliminating the danger it posed. News of the Komarov family's tragic end quickly spread, shaking the region. The incident underscored the lethal risks of remote wilderness, highlighting Siberia's brutal reality, where only the strong survive, and even then, survival is never assured. The expanse of ice in extreme conditions is a realm where only the most resilient survive. Polar bears, apex predators in this unforgiving environment, face the harshest of challenges. A month-long expedition led by seasoned explorers aimed to document the effects of climate change in this hostile region. The team was aware of the dangers: biting cold, shifting ice, unpredictable weather, and the looming threat of polar bears. The team comprised 5 members: Graham, the experienced expedition leader; Aubrey, the young climatologist; Derek, a marine biologist studying the region's wildlife; Andre, an Arctic photographer; and Lamar, an expert in glaciology. Their mission was clear: gather crucial data on the Arctic's changing conditions. Each day, they ventured onto the ice, meticulously documenting the transformations occurring in the environment. Every aspect of the expedition was planned with precision. The team was equipped with cutting-edge thermal imaging technology, durable tents, flare guns, and early warning systems for detecting large animals. Yet, in the unpredictable Arctic, even the best-laid plans could falter. As the weeks progressed, the team observed alarming changes. Ice floes, once solid and stable, now cracked and drifted more frequently. Temperature fluctuations were more extreme, and wildlife sightings were scarce. Derek noted the absence of seals, a critical prey for polar bears. This absence suggested that hungry bears might become increasingly desperate and aggressive. One evening, while setting up camp on a drifting ice floe, the team was enveloped by the dim light of Arctic twilight. The horizon was a vast white expanse, occasionally interrupted by distant icebergs. Despite the serene appearance, there was an underlying tension. The day's grim findings had added weight to their mission. The team worked swiftly to establish their camp. They chose the floe for its stability, but were aware that the ice's unpredictability required them to remain alert and ready to move. Graham, ever vigilant, ensured that tripwires and flares were correctly placed, knowing that their presence might attract the Arctic's apex predators. As night fell and temperatures plummeted, the team huddled in their main tent, analyzing the day's data and planning for the days ahead. The flow's increasing drift added urgency to their discussions. They needed to act strategically to complete their mission before the end of the expedition. Unbeknownst to the team, a large male polar bear was prowling the flow's edges. Driven by hunger and desperation, the bear had been traversing the ice for days in search of seals. The bear's acute sense of smell had detected the explorer's scent from afar, guiding it toward their camp with relentless determination. The bear, its thick fur blending with the ice, approached the camp stealthily. The explorers remained unaware of the predator's presence, focusing on their work and discussions. The Arctic's vast and silent expanse held both beauty and danger, a constant reminder of the wilderness's unpredictability. As the bear approached the camp, it moved with a cautious, almost stealthy gait. It knew the terrain well, navigating the cracks and crevices in the ice with ease. The bear's massive paws, designed for traction on the slippery surface, made barely a sound. Its sharp and alert eyes scanned the camp, taking in the tents and the equipment. The bear could sense the presence of the humans, and its instincts were on high alert. Inside the tent, the team remained oblivious to the danger lurking outside. They were focused on their work, unaware that the bear had drawn dangerously close. The tripwires and flares, their first line of defense, were in place, but the bear, driven by hunger, was undeterred. It circled the camp, its nostrils flaring as it picked up the scent of food and human sweat. The bear's muscles tensed, its predatory instincts kicking in as it prepared to strike. As the night deepened, Graham decided to check the camp's perimeter one last time before turning in. He stepped out into the frigid air, his breath visible in the cold. He moved methodically, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, scanning for any signs of movement. He knew that in the Arctic, vigilance was essential to us, survival. But the bear, sensing the movement, had already set its sights on a different target. Lamar had ventured out to retrieve some equipment from a sled that had been left near the edge of the camp. He moved quickly, wanting to get back inside where it was warm. But as he approached the sled, the bear, driven by its primal need to feed, made its move. The attack was swift and brutal, a blur of motion in the dark. The polar bear lunged at Lamar with a force that belied its size, its mighty jaws clamping down on his shoulder and driving him to the ground. Lamar's survival instincts surged, but the bear's overwhelming strength made resistance nearly impossible. Its claws tore through his clothing and flesh, inflicting excruciating pain that radiated through his body. Lamar struggled, his hands flailing uselessly against the bear's thick fur. The creature's grip was relentless, its teeth sinking deeper with each second. His mind was a chaotic swirl of pain, fear, and disbelief. Despite his awareness of the risks and his preparedness for a potential encounter, nothing could have readied him for this brutal reality. The rest of the team heard the commotion and rushed outside, but by the time they reached Lamar, it was too late. The bear, sensing their approach, emitted a deep guttural growl that echoed across the ice. With a final, savage shake of its head, it dragged Lamar's lifeless body away into the darkness. The team was left in shock, struggling to process the horror of what had occurred. The icy wind carried the scent of blood and the bear's growl, a grim reminder of their vulnerability. They realized that pursuing the bear would only lead to further tragedy. The stark reality of their situation hit hard. They were alone in one of Earth's most remote and unforgiving regions, at the mercy of a predator with no compassion. Seeking refuge, they retreated to their emergency shelter, a reinforced tent designed for extreme conditions, but offering little solace in the face of such violence. Huddled together, they shivered from both the cold and the raw fear that gripped them. The air was thick with shock, each member haunted by the memory of Lamar's screams. Graham, the leader, knew immediate action was necessary. He ordered an evacuation and sent out a distress call to their support team stationed miles away. The support team, well-versed in Arctic dangers, responded swiftly. Yet even as preparations for evacuation began, the weight of Lamar's loss hung heavily over them. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as they awaited rescue. The ordinarily peaceful Arctic sounds now felt ominous, as if the ice itself was closing in on them. The bear's attack had left a searing mark on their minds, a constant reminder of the peril that lurked in the Arctic's icy expanse. Their unity, once their strength, now felt fragile in the face of such a devastating loss. When the rescue team arrived, the explorers were physically unharmed, but emotionally shattered. They had come to the Arctic to study climate change and witness the environment's transformations. Still, instead, they were confronted with the brutal reality of survival in one of the planet's harshest landscapes. Rachel, drawn to the wild, had always found solace in the Sierra Nevada mountains with their rugged peaks and shadowy valleys. The allure of solitude and the challenge of navigating this terrain had long captivated her. Well prepared and experienced, she had meticulously studied maps, learned trails, and readied herself for any scenario. On this particular morning, the sky was a brilliant, endless blue. Rachel chose a remote trail she had hiked before, winding through thick pine forests and beside crystal-clear lakes where solitude reigned and only nature's sounds were present. As she walked, Rachel remained vigilant, aware of the wildlife that inhabited the Sierra Nevada. Armed with bear spray, a whistle, and a knife, she followed safety protocols to avoid startling a bear. The day was uneventful until she entered a shaded stretch and spotted a large black bear about 20 yards away. The bear, moving slowly, seemed unaware of her presence. Rachel froze and reached for her bear spray, her hand trembling. Unlike previous encounters, this bear did not retreat, but instead locked eyes with her, signaling a potentially dangerous situation. The bear's eyes were dark and unblinking. Rachel felt a surge of adrenaline as the bear took a step toward her. She tried to remember her training. Stay calm, don't run, make yourself look more prominent. But the bear wasn't following the usual script. It didn't pause, didn't hesitate. It kept coming, a low, menacing growl rumbling from deep within its chest. Rachel slowly began to back away, her heart pounding in her ears. The bear followed, its massive paws crunching on the forest floor. She raised her arms, trying to appear larger, trying to dissuade the bear from advancing, but the bear's demeanor had shifted. There was no fear, no curiosity, only aggression. She fumbled with the bear spray, her fingers clumsy with fear. The bear was close now. Too close. Rachel knew she was in grave danger. She aimed the spray and squeezed the trigger, releasing a cloud of fiery mist directly into the bear's face. The bear recoiled, shaking its head and snorting. For a brief moment, Rachel thought she had succeeded. The bear staggered back, pawing at its face. But the relief was short-lived. The bear, enraged by the burning in its eyes and nose, let out a roar and charged. Rachel barely had time to react. The bear barreled into her with the force of a freight train, knocking her off her feet. She hit the ground hard, the wind driven from her lungs in a painful rush. The bear was on her in an instant, its massive weight pinning her down. Rachel fought with everything she had. She kicked and thrashed, trying to push the bear off of her. She could feel the bear's hot breath on her face and smell the musky scent of its fur. The bear's claws raked across her chest, tearing through her jacket and into her flesh. She screamed in pain, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the trees. The bear's jaws closed around her arm, its teeth sinking deep into her flesh. She tried to pull free, but the bear's grip was like a vice, unrelenting and merciless. Every instinct in Rachel's body screamed at her to fight, to survive. She swung her free arm at the bear, hitting it with weak, desperate blows. She reached for the knife at her side, her fingers slick with blood as she fumbled to pull it from its sheath. The bear shook its head, tearing into her arm, and Rachel's vision blurred with the pain. With a final surge of strength, she managed to draw the knife. She stabbed at the bear's side, driving the blade into its thick hide. The bear roared, a sound of fury and pain. It reared back, releasing her arm, and Rachel seized the opportunity. She tried to crawl away, dragging herself across the ground, but her body was broken, her strength sapped. The bear lunged at Rachel, knocking her to the ground with a powerful swipe. Dazed, she saw the bear's massive form blotting out the sky, its bloodied muzzle dripping with her blood. Realizing her fate, Rachel fought with a knife, but her strikes were ineffective. The bear casually knocked the knife from her hand and clamped its jaws around her neck. The excruciating pain overwhelmed her, and darkness began to close in as her heart pounded fiercely. As the bear's grip tightened, Rachel's thoughts turned to her family, the mountains she loved, and the countless times she had walked these trails. Then, everything faded away. Later that day, other hikers found Rachel's body, having heard the struggle and the bear's roars, but arriving too late. The community was shocked by the tragedy, mourning the loss of a seasoned hiker. Authorities set up patrols and issued warnings, ultimately tracking and euthanizing the bear for public safety. Rachel's death was a sad reminder of the wild's unpredictable dangers. In October 2024, Dave Harris, a seasoned hunter, ventured deep into Wyoming's remote wilderness. The crisp air was eerily still, setting his instincts on edge. As Dave navigated through the dense forest, he stumbled upon the carcass of a massive grizzly bear. The sight was shocking. This bear had been a formidable creature, but now its body was marred with deep, vicious wounds. It looked as if it had been killed in a violent struggle. Dave's initial thought was that another hunter might have taken down the bear, but as he approached, the gravity of the scene became clear. Blood matted its fur, and its lifeless eyes seemed to tell of a brutal fight. A sudden, guttural growl shattered the silence, sending a chill through Dave. Emerging from nearby bushes was a larger male grizzly bear, its eyes blazing with fury. This was no mere territorial growl. It was the victor of the fight, now defending its claim. Realizing the threat, Dave's heart raced. The massive bear, even larger than the dead one, moved with purposeful intent. This wasn't a chance encounter. Dave had intruded on the grizzly's territory, and now he was its target. Instinct kicked in and he fled into the forest, dodging rocks and roots as he sprinted through the rugged terrain. Behind him, the bear's growls grew louder, its powerful strides pounding the earth in relentless pursuit. Every breath Dave took was sharp and ragged, the danger ever present as the enraged grizzly closed in. At that moment, survival was all that mattered. One wrong step, and the wilderness would claim him too. Dave's mind raced, calculating his best chance for survival. He knew he needed to put as much distance between himself and the bear as possible, but the dense forest and the bear's speed made it a relentless pursuit. Each burst of speed was met with a staggering reminder of the bear's persistence. The forest was alive with the sounds of the chase. Branches snaped and leaves rustled as Dave navigated through the labyrinth of trees. At one point, Dave attempted to gain some advantage by climbing a steep incline. He hoped the higher ground would give him a better view of his surroundings and provide a chance to evade the bear. He scrambled up the slope, his muscles straining with effort. The incline was treacherous, but Dave's experience allowed him to scale it quickly. As he reached the top, he glanced back, his eyes scanning the forest below for any sign of the bear. However, the grizzly's presence was unmistakable. It had slowed momentarily, its massive form visible through the gaps in the trees. Its breathing was heavy, each exhale a cloud of mist in the chilly air. The bear's gaze was fixed on Dave, its eyes filled with unyielding resolve. It was clear that the grizzly was not deterred. It would continue its pursuit with relentless determination. Dave knew he couldn't afford to rest. He descended the slope with the same urgency, trying to stay ahead of the bear. His mind was a whirl of strategies, each one a fleeting hope for escape. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees and underbrush forming a tangled barrier that threatened to trap him. Despite his efforts, the bear's growls and the thudding of its footsteps were a constant reminder of the danger just behind him. With every ounce of strength and skill he possessed, Dave continued to push forward. His legs ached and his breath was ragged, but he couldn't afford to stop. The forest, once a place of quiet beauty, had become a battleground. Every shadow, every sound was a potential threat, and the grizzly's presence was a stark reminder of nature's raw power. In the midst of his flight, Dave spotted a narrow, rocky crevice, a potential hiding spot. Without hesitation, he dove into the space, hoping that the bear's size and the narrowness of the gap would allow him to be spared. He pressed himself into the crevice, barely managing to stay out of sight. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of how close he had come to being overtaken. From his hiding spot, Dave could hear the bear's frustration. The grizzly circled the area, its growls filled with a mixture of anger and confusion. It clawed at the ground, a sign of its agitation. Dave held his breath, praying that the bear's temper would drive it away, at least long enough for him to find another means of escape. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, as Dave remained hidden, his senses alert to every sound. Finally, the bear's growls grew fainter, and the heavy thudding of its steps receded into the distance. Dave waited for a while longer, ensuring that the danger had passed before he carefully emerged from his hiding spot. Exhausted but alive, Dave surveyed the area, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from his system. The encounter had been a stark reminder of the unpredictability of nature and the raw power that even a single creature could wield. As he made his way back to safer ground, Dave's thoughts were consumed by the intensity of his near-death experience. The wilderness had once again proven to be a place of both beauty and danger, and he had been forced to confront its darker side. The encounter with the grizzly had left an indelible mark on him, a reminder of the fine line between predator and prey in the untamed wilderness. For Dave Harris, it was hit with an unforgiving ferocity, catching the group of tourists entirely off guard. They had been staying in a small, remote cabin nestled deep within the Alaskan wilderness, a place meant to offer peace and isolation, far from the trappings of everyday life. In early September 2024, the air was crisp, and the landscape stretched in every direction, offering breathtaking views of jagged mountain peaks and thick forests. But the beauty was deceptive. That evening, the tranquil atmosphere turned violent as dark clouds rolled in with startling speed, unleashing torrents of rain and howling winds that battered the fragile structure they were sheltering in. The cabin, old and weathered, groaned under the strain of the storm. Windows rattled in their frames, and the roof shingles peeled away, disappearing into the chaos. Inside, the group of 5 huddled together, watching as the storm tested the limits of their fragile sanctuary. Water leaked through cracks in the ceiling, and the wind found every possible gap, sending cold gusts swirling around the room. At its peak, the storm became too much for the cabin to endure. A loud crack split the air as a section of the roof collapsed inward, bringing with it a deluge of rain and debris. Frantic, they scrambled to repair the damage, but it was clear that the cabin had been severely compromised. The wooden walls, already old, had been further weakened by the battering winds and water. The storm raged on into the night, but as morning broke, the winds finally began to die down, leaving the group to survey the damage. The roof was partially destroyed, and the walls had buckled, sagging inward as if ready to give way at any moment. Despite the isolation and lack of communication, they still believed they could fix the cabin enough to stay safe until help arrived, but the reality was far more dire. As they worked to patch up the holes and shore up the walls, something far more ominous began to unfold in the wilderness around them. Unbeknownst to them, the scent of food stored inside the cabin had carried far on the storm's winds, attracting the attention of a nearby grizzly bear. This wasn't just any bear. It was a large, hungry male, driven by a primal instinct as it sniffed the air and followed the tantalizing scent through the dense forest. With the summer drawing to a close, the bear's need to fatten up for the coming winter grew ever more urgent. The scent of food was irresistible. As the group worked outside trying to reinforce the structure, they heard rustling in the underbrush surrounding the cabin. At first, they thought it might be the wind, but the rustling grew louder, more deliberate. Then they saw it, an enormous grizzly bear emerging from the trees. The bear was massive, its dark fur matted with rain, its eyes locked onto the cabin. It sniffed the air again, detecting the scent of the food they had inside. The storm had not only weakened their cabin, but it also made the bear's approach inevitable. Panic set in as the group scrambled to get back inside. The bear advanced slowly at first, curious but cautious. The tourists hurried into the cabin, slamming the damaged door shut behind them and barricading it with whatever they could find. They hoped the bear would lose interest, but the scent of food was too powerful, too enticing for the grizzly to ignore. The bear circled the cabin, its massive paws crunching through the wet debris scattered across the ground. With a sudden burst of force, it lunged at the door, slamming its body against the weakened wood. The walls shuddered, and the group could feel the sheer power of the animal on the other side. Again and again the bear struck, and the door began to splinter. They realized they couldn't hold the cabin against the bear's relentless assault. With no other option, the group fled to the basement, a small, cramped space beneath the cabin, accessible by a trapdoor in the floor. They had initially planned to use it for storage, but now it would serve as their last line of defense. They piled into the narrow basement, sealing the trapdoor behind them. Above, they could hear the bear tearing into the cabin with ease. The walls, already weakened by the storm, were no match for the animal's strength. Wood cracked and splintered as the bear ripped through the structure, determined to get to the food it could smell inside. Trapped below, the tourists could hear everything: the crashing of wood, the heavy breathing of the bear as it ransacked the cabin, and the occasional deep growl that sent shivers down their spines. They were helpless, sealed off in the dark, damp basement with no way to communicate with the outside world. The storm had knocked out any chance of cell service, and even if they had managed to call for help, it would take days for anyone to reach them in such a remote area. The grizzly, having torn through much of the cabin, found the stash of food and began to devour it with brutal efficiency. For hours, the bear lingered, feasting and exploring the remains of the cabin. Every sound it made sent fresh waves of fear through the group below. They knew that if the bear discovered the trapdoor, it would easily tear it apart just as it had the rest of the cabin. Time passed slowly, every minute stretching into eternity. The tourists could do nothing but wait, trapped in a constant state of fear. They had no idea how long the bear would stay, or if it would eventually find them. Sleep was impossible, and the tension in the basement was palpable. Above them, the bear continued to roam, occasionally brushing against the trapdoor or scratching at the remaining walls. By the time the bear finally left, the cabin was in ruins. The roof was half gone, the walls splintered, and the interior had been completely ransacked. But the tourists trapped in the basement had survived. They emerged cautiously, unsure if the bear was truly gone. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and the musty smell of fear that had permeated the confined space below. The group, though physically unharmed, was shaken to its core. A day later, when rescuers finally arrived, they found the group huddled in the cabin's wreckage, exhausted and terrified but alive. The bear had long since vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind only destruction in its wake. The tourists were surrounded by the remnants of the violent encounter, broken walls, scattered debris, and the gnawing realization of how close they had come to disaster. Summer of 2023, Sarah and Tom set off into the Alaskan wilderness, filled with excitement and the thrill of adventure. They had always been drawn to the wild, a place where nature was raw and untamed, far removed from the hustle and comfort of modern life. For them, this backpacking trip into the vast Alaskan terrain was the ultimate escape, a test of their endurance, skill, and bond. The first few days were everything they'd hoped for. The jagged mountains loomed in the distance, glaciers shimmering in the sunlight. Streams gurgled as they wound their way through the dense spruce forests, and the air was filled with the crisp scent of pine. They hiked long hours through rough terrain, pausing only to take in the magnificent views or to rest at a scenic overlook. As experienced backpackers, Sarah and Tom were well prepared for the journey, carrying everything they needed on their backs, from lightweight tents to food supplies and bear spray. Despite the wild isolation of their surroundings, they felt confident, perhaps too confident. The wilderness, after all, was indifferent to human plans. On the fourth evening of their trek, as they set up camp near a small, tranquil river, something changed. Sarah, while gathering wood for the campfire, spotted a dark, hulking figure in the distance who turned out to be a grizzly bear. It stood just at the tree line, its massive form silhouetted against the twilight sky. It wasn't close, but it was there, watching them, its presence sending a chill down Sarah's spine. She called Tom over, and together they stared at the bear, hoping it would move on, but it didn't. After a few tense moments, it strode off into the forest, disappearing. That night, sleep didn't come quickly. The reality of their vulnerability became stark. Out here, miles from civilization, they were at the mercy of the wild. Tom tried to reassure Sarah, pointing out that they had bear spray and had been careful with their food, hanging it high in a tree far from their tent. But the sense of unease lingered. Somewhere out there, a grizzly bear had taken notice of them. The following day, they packed up camp and resumed their trek, moving deeper into the forest. Despite the stunning scenery, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves set her on edge. Tom tried to distract her with stories and light banter, but she was only half listening. Her eyes frequently scanned the dense underbrush, searching for any sign of the bear. By midday, they reached a rocky outcrop offering a panoramic view of the valley below. They stopped to rest, but as Sarah looked behind them, she saw it again. The bear. It was farther away than the previous night, but its presence was unmistakable. It was following them. The days that followed were a blur of tension and unease. The grizzly never approached them directly, but its shadow loomed over every step they took. Sometimes they would spot it in the distance, a dark figure moving through the trees or standing on a ridge watching. Other times, they would hear the faint sound of branches snapping behind them, the subtle signs that they were not alone. They altered their route several times, hoping to lose the bear in the thick forest or by crossing streams. Yet no matter what they did, it seemed always to be there, a silent predator stalking them from the shadows. On the sixth day, the tension reached its breaking point. Exhausted and unnerved, they set up camp earlier than usual, choosing a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. They were miles from the nearest trailhead, deep in the heart of the wilderness, and had seen no signs of other humans for days. The isolation, once thrilling, now felt suffocating. As the sun began to set, they prepared dinner over a small campfire. The air was excellent and the light was fading fast. They tried to keep their movements quiet, not wanting to draw any attention, but the quiet didn't last long. The wind shifted, and with it came a familiar, unwelcome sound, the crack of a branch breaking in the distance. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced at Tom, who had also heard it. He motioned for her to stay calm, but they both knew what was coming. The bear had found them again. Without warning, the grizzly appeared from the tree line, but this time it wasn't watching from a distance. It was charging. The massive animal thundered toward them, its eyes locked on Tom, who had stood up, instinctively putting himself between Sarah and the bear. Before he could even react, the grizzly barreled into him with a force that sent him crashing to the ground, his body crumpling under the impact. Tom's head hit a rock and he went limp, unconscious before he could even cry out. The bear, its focus now shifting to Sarah, growled as it stood over Tom's prone form. It was an enormous beast, its fur matted and thick, its eyes wild with the intensity of a predator on the hunt. Sarah's survival instincts kicked in. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the bear spray, her mind racing with terror and desperation. She had mere seconds to act. The bear, looming over Tom, sniffed at him, its jaws opening slightly, revealing massive teeth stained with the remnants of its last meal. A low growl rumbled from deep within the bear's chest, a warning that it wasn't done. In a flash of movement, Sarah pulled the bear spray from her pack and aimed it at the grizzly. Her fingers tightened on the trigger, and a powerful burst of spray shot out, hitting the bear directly in the face. The reaction was immediate. The grizzly recoiled, snarling in pain as the chemical irritant filled its nostrils and eyes. It staggered back, shaking its massive head violently in an attempt to rid itself of the burning sensation. Sarah didn't wait to see what would happen next. She grabbed Tom by his arms, adrenaline coursing through her body as she dragged him away from the campsite, her muscles screaming in protest. She knew she had to get him to safety before the bear recovered. The grizzly was still thrashing in the clearing, disoriented by the bear spray. But Sarah didn't dare slow down. Every step was a struggle, Tom's limp body weighing heavily on her as she pulled him across the uneven ground, her heart hammering in her chest. She managed to drag him behind a large fallen tree, hoping it would provide some cover. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her entire body trembling from the exertion and fear. For a long time she lay there, listening to the sounds of the bear's enraged growls fading into the distance. When silence finally returned to the forest, Sarah dared glance over the log. The bear was gone, but the campsite was destroyed. A chaotic mess of torn packs, scattered gear, and deep claw marks gouged into the earth. Tom stirred, groaning softly as he began to regain consciousness. Relief washed over Sarah, but it was short-lived. The grizzly may have retreated for now, but its relentless pursuit had shaken her to her core. The wilderness had shown them its true, unforgiving nature. Though they had survived the attack, they knew they would forever be haunted by the grizzly's persistent stalking. A reminder that humans were not the apex predators in the wild. Sweep across the remote Kamchatka Peninsula as a testament to the rugged wilderness that had drawn Natalia Petrova to its heart. An experienced hiker, she had explored some of the most isolated and dangerous terrains in the world, but the untamed beauty of Kamchatka was unlike anything she had encountered before. Its volcanic mountains and vast expanses of uninhabited land offered a challenge she couldn't resist. The landscape promised solitude and adventure, a test of endurance against the elements. Natalia's trek had been organized and well prepared. She had planned a route that would take her through dense forests, open tundra, and across the rivers that crisscrossed the peninsula. It was the rivers that posed the most significant risk, their icy waters swollen by the melting snow caps from the nearby volcanoes. She had crossed several smaller streams over the past few days, but today's river would be different. It was larger, faster, and more unpredictable. As she approached the riverbank, she studied the water. The current was swift, the surface bubbling with unseen turbulence. Natalia knew she would need to be cautious. She tightened her backpack, made sure her balance was secure, and began her slow, calculated descent into the water. Each step sent a jolt of cold through her body, but she remained focused, her gaze fixed on the far bank. The river's pull was stronger than she anticipated, tugging at her legs as she waded deeper. The rocks beneath her feet were slippery, requiring her to move deliberately to avoid being swept away. She was nearly halfway across when she noticed movement upstream. A massive grizzly bear appeared from behind a cluster of boulders, its muscular frame lumbering toward the river. Natalia froze for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. The bear had not noticed her yet, and its focus was entirely on crossing the river. Its powerful limbs sliced through the water with ease, a creature born to navigate this harsh environment. For a fleeting moment, Natalia hoped the bear might cross without incident, that it would pass her by as just another insignificant part of the landscape. But as the bear drew closer, its eyes locked onto her. There was a brief pause, an instant in which both Natalia and the bear seemed to size each other up, and then, in an explosion of muscle and fury, the bear charged. The river seemed to explode around her. Natalia's instincts screamed at her to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The rushing waters tugged at her legs, slowing her movements as the bear barreled through the water, its paws slapping the surface, sending up sprays of icy droplets. She turned, trying to retreat to the safety of the opposite bank, but the bear was too fast, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. With no time to escape, Natalia braced herself as the massive animal lunged at her. The impact was brutal, knocking her off her feet and into the frigid water. The current, already swift and relentless, seized her as she and the bear plunged downstream. Natalia fought to stay above the surface, her limbs thrashing against the water and the bear's body. But the chaos of the river and the bear's frantic movements overwhelmed her. The bear, disoriented by the fast-moving current and Natalia's unexpected presence, began to panic. Its powerful paws clawed at the water, and in desperation it pushed Natalia under repeatedly. She struggled, gasping for air each time she broke the surface, only to be shoved back under by the bear's weight. The icy water filled her lungs, her muscles burning with exhaustion as she fought to stay alive. The bear, in its wild thrashing, was just as much a victim of the river's fury, its instincts driving it to fight for its survival. Natalia's strength began to wane. The cold was sapping her energy, and each time the bear's massive body forced her beneath the surface, it became harder to fight her way back up. She could feel the animal's raw power, its fur brushing against her skin, its claws scraping her in its frantic attempt to stay afloat. The river, once just a natural obstacle in her journey, had now become a deadly force, a living entity that was dragging her toward her doom. The current carried them both further downstream, bouncing them off rocks and into submerged branches. Natalia's vision blurred as her lungs burned with the need for air, but every attempt to resurface was met with the crushing weight of the bear. The water roared in her ears, a loud sound that drowned out all thought, leaving only primal terror and the overwhelming urge to survive. But the struggle was hopeless. The river was too strong, the bear too panicked, and Natalia too exhausted. She felt her body grow weaker with each passing second, her limbs becoming leaden as the icy grip of the water claimed her. The bear, still flailing and thrashing, was beyond reason, its panic closing its eyes to anything but its survival. As Natalia's strength ebbed away, she was forced under once more, the weight of the bear pressing down on her. This time, she lacked the energy to fight. The cold, the exhaustion, and the relentless current combined into an inescapable force, dragging her deeper into the dark, freezing water. Her last breath escaped her in a torrent of bubbles, her body succumbing to the inevitable. For days, the river kept its secrets, the bear long since having escaped its icy clutches and disappeared into the wilderness. Natalia's body was eventually found downstream, washed up on a rocky bank. The telltale marks of the encounter were etched into her skin, the deep scratches from the bear's claws, the bruises from the rocks, and the unmistakable signs of drowning. The Kamchatka Peninsula, with all its wild beauty and danger, had claimed another life. Natalia, once a seasoned adventurer, had been no match for the raw power of nature.